Hey guys, welcome into my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Carrie. We're gonna be doing a ranking of all of the eyeshadow palettes that I tried so far in 2023. There are 32. I've taken a little bit longer, I think, to film these videos because I'm really testing these palettes. Like, I am giving them my all. I'm using them at least 5 times, or the ones that really just don't perform well, I'm at least trying to try as many shades as I possibly can before I decide whether or not I want to keep them in my collection so that I can tell you guys how I think they performed or just overall how they rank. I'm going to try and do this once every quarter on my channel and then do a final roundup at the end of the year for all of the palettes that I tried in the present year, sometime around the end of December. So there are 32 palettes. I have a lot of dedicated videos to these, or have tried these and like testing new makeup on my channel. So if you are interested in seeing a lot of these palettes in more detail, you can always check out my channel. But there are some palettes that I have tried this year that I didn't put on camera. I've just been testing out personally. So without further ado, let's hop right into the ranking. I'm not going to keep track of like what number I'm at because I'm terrible at doing that. So I will go ahead and pop the number somewhere on the screen here. I also did want to mention that I do have a similar ranking style video of all the eyeshadow palettes that I tried in 2022. So check out my ranking videos playlist and you will see it there. So coming in at the bottom is a palette from Profusion that my husband picked up at, I think, CVS. This is the Winter Ballroom palette. This doesn't appear to be available anymore. It's honestly not the cheapest thing this size that I've ever purchased, even from Profusion. I think this was $14.99. And I like the color story. I think that you get neutrals in here with greens and blues and purples, and you can create a ton of different looks. The problem was the quality was so bad in this. It was honestly some of the patchiest shadows that I've ever tried. This one down here is a really beautiful navy blue shade, and it was so patchy. It was blending away to nothing every time I would try and build it up. It was terrible, and it was mostly the deep shades that were doing that to me. The other mattes aren't so bad, but the shimmers in this palette are off the wall. Like, they're just very, very different. Some of them are pretty nice. There are a ton of pressed glitters in here. The pressed glitters aren't that great of a quality. Some are better than others, and they don't have a lot of stick to them. Ignore that. I think that's like lipstick I was swatching, but they don't drag out. They're very dusty and powdery. They just don't have a good stick. Some of the shimmers are basically like toppers. It just overall was really bad quality in pretty much everything. So I couldn't find like an overly redeeming quality about the palette, unfortunately. And then this shade right here, that's kind of like the softest shimmer in this palette. Once I used it, of course, like, you know, the oil started to kind of leak into the pan. I have found that with other like indie shadows and high quality shadows, so it's not necessarily a negative thing. It usually means that it's just formulated with like a lot of extra oils in it, and that's nice. It makes it very creamy, but I've only used the shade like once or twice and it already did that, and it's pretty significant. So overall, just nothing redeeming about this palette. Was not good. I actually like a lot of Profusion shadows, so this one was surprising to me. There was at one point before I started to build my collection that all I did was use Profusion shadows because, you know, I was balling on a budget. So all I had in my collection was Profusion, but this is bad. This is so bad. It was not good. It's really cheap packaging, and Profusion is overall generally pretty cheap, but this is like, you know, by far probably the cheapest Profusion packaging that I've probably ever come across. So this one comes in at the bottom. The next one that I have is a 5-pan palette from Wet n Wild. This is one of their color icons. This one is in the color story Walking on Eggshells. I did a full face of makeup that I picked up from Walmart, and it's not an overly fun or non-neutral color story. It's definitely like an everyday palette, and so I thought I might get a lot of use out of it so long as the quality of the shadows were pretty good, but they're not. This one right here, just, it doesn't build any depth. Like, it was hard for me to get this to really stay pigmented. It was kind of blending into ash, and this is supposed to be like a shimmer shade, but it's not. It's this powdery white. It's almost like a white matte. There just isn't reflection on it. It's not necessarily bad, but it doesn't even have as much like light reflecting quality about it as the other shimmer in here. But yeah, this one right here just didn't like keep its depth. It didn't hold its depth. It was a very, very like ashy shade. These are all like pretty powdery. Well, not all. The two mattes in here are pretty powdery. And so yeah, it was kind of like patching and then blending into nothing. And so There are other palettes in here that you'll see are boring and bland like this, and I don't mind them because this is kind of the everyday color story that I would reach for, but it has to be decent quality. So yeah, this just wasn't. It's probably been like a really long time since I've used a Wet n Wild eyeshadow, so I don't know what I was expecting, but not the best quality. This is definitely like, oh, I wouldn't try it again sort of thing. And there are other drugstore shadows that I think do really perform well. This just wasn't one of them. The next two that I have are from the same collection. These are kind of hard to put these here. I feel a little bit bad, but these were a recent release from Rude Cosmetics. These were in collaboration with Mentos. They came out with two of them for their mixed fruit. One was the neon palette, and that is this one that came in next. It was pretty awful. Like, it's definitely an out there color story. I like the concept of this. Like, this whole row up here is all shimmer, this is all matte, and this is all pressed glitters. And I actually like me a pressed glitter occasionally. And I think these were the best thing about this palette. These shimmers are really fun. They actually stick to the eye really well. They didn't give me any trouble or any fallout. I love like the colors of the shimmers because I don't have any in my collection, like this blue and this green. It's actually kind of fun. It's not a color story that I'm gonna reach for every day, but I think it was fun. But the mattes were so bad. They really weren't pigmented. These three kept blending into each other and they looked like the same on the eyes, and the shimmers just weren't my favorite. They have a little bit of glitter to them, but they're almost just like mattes. They just don't have a lot of metallic finish, and so they're not very light reflecting. I like that they're thin, but they just don't look like a true shimmer to me. Like, once you get them to the eyes, they kind of just look like a matte, and they're all like that. So these three, very, very similar. Not a whole lot of pigmentation. Shimmers were, yeah, just not really good quality shimmers. My favorite thing about this was the pressed glitters. I can't exactly remember how much this retailed for, but I feel like it was like $22 a piece for both of these palettes. So for me, getting pressed glitters for $22, like that being the best thing about the palette, was definitely a bummer. So that's why this is where it is. The next one I have is still from the same collection, but this one was the pastel palette. I liked this one a little bit better because I really enjoyed, I think, the shimmer formula just a little bit more. I liked the glitters in here, again, the same. But when I was creating the eye look out of these pastels, I got the same thing that I did from the neon palette, which was just, they blended into nothing. This doesn't even show up. And I know that they're pastel and they're on the lighter side anyway, but you can still make a pastel pigmented, and these literally blended into looking identical. This was nothing. There was nothing pulling on the eye really, but I did prefer these shimmers just a little bit more because I think they had a little bit more light reflection to them than the other one did. And these glitters, again, like, they're just fun and they're pretty good quality. And I liked the shades of these glitters better than I did on the neon palette. Even though I liked the neon palette for the glitters, I think that these ones were just like more everyday wearable shades. But yeah, the best thing that they did about these palettes was honestly the glitters. So I probably will keep them in my collection just for the sake of like the glitters, because I did like them. But yeah, I don't think I'll pick up another Rude Cosmetics palette, unfortunately. The next palette that I have is from Essence. This is one of their newer releases. This is the Blooming Wings eyeshadow palette, and there were two releases for these Blooming Wings palette in January, and this one was in the color story Let Me Be Your Wings. This is a very neutral color story. It's very safe. It is, though, comprised of shades that I really like on an everyday basis because I like reaching for neutrals, but I also like a lot of pinks on my eye and things that pull, maybe not necessarily like full purple, but that definitely like are deeper kind of berry colors. I like those for everyday wear. And while I think that the mattes in this palette were actually like quite good for beginners, and I think that they were very like easy to blend, they just weren't super pigmented. There's three mattes over here. I constantly point to the wrong shades because it's hard for me to see in the reflection, but this one, and this one actually pull very, very similar on the eye. They just don't have like a lot of difference when they translate. So they don't give me a lot of depth and dimension, and that's honestly something that I really look for. I always want to build dimension and depth in my eyeshadow looks. That's my personal preference. And some people are very different. They like kind of like a one and done. They like a very simple eyeshadow look. They might throw like a color in the crease as like a transition or something like that, just to give the eye a little bit of depth. But I actually try and build like depth in the outer corner with a lot of my shadows, and so I need a pretty deep deepening shade, or one that gives me a lot of difference between some of the other ones, and there just wasn't in this palette. And the shimmers here, unfortunately, they're pretty bad. They again don't have a lot of like light reflection to them. There is like not a lot of payoff. This one confuses me. The shade right here, it just, again, not a lot of payoff, not a lot of light reflection to them. And a lot of the shades are very, very similar in the shimmers, like especially kind of like over here, there's 3 that are almost identical. And one of the things that I really love to do, if you've watched any of my other videos where I talk about eyeshadows, is that I pull in a pretty light color into like the inner part of my lid, because I try and give that part a little bit of dimension because my eyes are so hooded. And so that's just something that I like to do personally, and this one doesn't have that. The one that they have that's like the lightest shimmer is this one right here, but it's like a mixture of like a shimmer and like a matte together. It almost like it's a matte with sparkles basically. Yeah, overall couldn't get a lot of depth in it. The shimmer formula is pretty lackluster. I have to say though that one of my favorite drugstore palettes that I tried last year that went in my 2022 ranking was a palette from Essence. It was the Pumpkins Pretty Please, and I loved that one. Every shadow in there is so good. Shimmer, matte formula. I loved the Color Story. This one, not exactly the same formulation in my opinion. So that's why it is so low in my ranking. I kind of hate to say this, but like a lot of the drugstore ones are pretty low. I didn't have a lot of success with the drugstore ones that I've been trying, but honestly there are more, I think, drugstore that I've tried this year that were in like my 2022 ranking, simply because I wanted to kind of branch out and like give drugstore a try from like a lot of different brands. So that's kind of what I've been doing. But I think the ones that I'm looking at that are higher ranked are definitely not drugstore palettes. The next 2 that I have are from the same collection. These are the Destinations collection from Sephora. I haven't been a huge fan of the Sephora collection shadows in the past. I did say that when I tried these on my channel. And this one is in the, it doesn't really say like the name on these. It's hard to tell. You can find these online in the name that they call them, but it's just not listed on the palette. So whatever it is, like the more purpley one with the palm trees. Yeah, I can't remember what it was. And unfortunately I did realize like right away that they didn't have the name on it. This is just a very mild, like it's a pastel color story, but it's very mildly pigmented. So again, this was a situation where I could not get a lot of depth. I do like the layout of this though. The bottom row here is all shimmers, and then this top row here is mattes, and then you have like one that's more like a highlighting shade. And so I don't mind it. I do think this is a wasted shade for me. So I would have liked to have seen this be probably like a light shimmer, if that would have been pretty cool, but it isn't. And so I kind of do lose out on this shade. And I have said this before, which is that they have an even ratio between mattes and shimmers, or relatively close. I just think that gives like the best variety, that you can like build an all matte or an all shimmer or something along those lines. But anyway, the shade is pretty much wasted. I don't think that the shimmer formula is bad. I think it's actually like quite nice. I enjoyed this so much more than the Sephora collection shadows that I have tried in the past. A lot of their collections have been like cream shadows, and so I haven't enjoyed that because I've had a hard time picking them up on a brush and getting them to my eyes. But this one is a powder formula. I think the shimmers are definitely better than they've had historically. Unfortunately, these mattes are still, they're just not pigmented. They don't give a lot of depth. It was a super light look, and the shadows just don't last. So not a fan of the Sephora collection, and I've tried like 2 collections at this point. I'm done. I'm not gonna try anymore. The next one that I have is also from the Destinations collection. This one literally looks like Florida. Again, don't know the name on this one, but I prefer this color story a little bit more. Obviously the shades are a little bit darker. I love warm tone shadows. I love an orange shimmer. I thought this orange shimmer was so beautiful. It's not like super light reflecting or anything, but I still really like that shade. I think that the shade was different enough that you could, and like pigmented enough that you could use this as a transition shade. So this one wasn't wasted. wasted for me, and it does have like a pretty light shimmer in here. So overall, this Color Story is more my like speed than this one is. This is like the cool tone version, and it just was so cool it just didn't even show up on the eyes. This one does show up on the eyes. The problem is like the depth. In these shades right here, when they translate to the eye, they're literally almost identical. So yeah, same exact formula as this other one. It's just that I preferred this one a little bit better. The next one here is also from the drugstore. This is the Rainforest Haze eyeshadow palette from Catrice. I didn't realize when I picked this up that there's literally 2 mattes. This is a super heavy shimmer palette. I did not realize that. I guess I thought the Color Story was so beautiful that I wanted to get it without paying attention to what I was buying. This is the one matte, this is the second matte. So this matte is useless on me. It doesn't do anything, it's just a highlighting shade, which I don't typically use. It's nice to have it, but it doesn't do anything other than highlighting for me. So this is the only matte that I have in this palette, and I don't mind an all shimmer palette. But if I'm gonna have like an all shimmer palette, it's probably gonna be like a really good shimmer formula. For example, Adept Cosmetics, like something along those lines. I'm just not gonna think to reach for like this shimmer formula. And so I was hoping that this palette would be like an all-in-one like green palette for me, and it's not. And this shade is not really good quality. The matte in here is, it blends away to almost nothing. It's not a super pigmented shade. It doesn't hold its depth. It's everything wrong with a matte, in my opinion. But these shimmers, oh, I was wrong. There are 3. This one is a matte also. And yeah, so these 2 are super similar. This one is also wasted. It doesn't pull any color. I have tried this shade, so I apologize. It's still a heavy shimmer formula because these 2 mattes, what I said about this one is also true about this one. It just doesn't have any pigment or show up on me personally. But let me swatch some of these shimmers so you can see what I mean. Like, they are soft. They are buttery, like they're really good shimmer quality, and there's some fun like colored shimmers in here. And that's the reason that I would keep this palette, is because of the shimmer formula, honestly. But again, it's that thing where I'm not gonna think to reach for this shimmer formula necessarily over some of my other indie shadows. So I would have liked to have really good quality mattes in here. So I thought about using this as like a green palette for a green eye look that I wanted to create. So I don't dislike it. It's definitely gonna stay in my collection, but the best thing about it is the shimmers. I can just tell this is probably gonna get like pushed to the back of my drawer as I think to reach for more indie shimmers. The next one that I have, I don't know, this might like not necessarily upset people, but some people may not agree with this. This one is from Rowan Beauty. This is the 1111 palette. And I hope that I'm like saying that correctly. This is just an all like cream shadow. And I think that I get the concept. Like I could see why a lot of people like this, but it's more like an eyeshadow formula that you would use to blend with your fingers or pick up with your fingers. Like it's a more like finger friendly formula. And this one in the corner here, like it's a chunky mess to me. It's like dried out and it's just super duper chunky. I don't know if you guys can like see how like dried out it looks. This is not an old palette by any means. I purchased it straight from the Rowan website. So, you know, it should have come, I would think, you know, unexpired and good quality. The rest of these are a different formula than that one that I swatched first. And they're actually like kind of nice. Like I don't mind them. They have more creaminess about them. There's more stick to them, but they're a formula that you have to play with your fingers because they do not pick up on a brush. And I think this is like a companion palette, obviously, but also more like a one and done kind of palette. Like you have to like these shades and you can kind of just swipe it on with your finger. I don't personally like doing that. I thought that I would. I just didn't find them like blending in very well when I was using my finger. And again, my favorite light shimmer in this palette is a hot chunky mess. It doesn't feel the same, like it's not the same formula. And it never like blended nicely. I mean, when I go like this on my finger, like that is not how hard I'm gonna rub on my eye to get the shade to go on. It's, you know, I'm not gonna sit there and go like this. And so I can get it to work. It's just like application wise, like it was a no-no for me. I just am not the kind of person to reach for a shadow like this, and I didn't find the quality consistent. I felt that some of these were really hard to work with. That's just me personally. I don't necessarily think that this is a bad palette overall. Like if you're someone who likes cream shadows, I think this is really nice, except that one shade in the corner. It's just not like my personal preference. The next palette that I have, I actually really do like in terms of like color story and the theme. It's from NYX. It's from the Way of the Water collection from Avatar. I picked up the whole collection. I have a dedicated video on this. If you are interested in seeing that, please check out my channel. I like the color story overall, but this is another palette where I found like the formula to just be pretty inconsistent. Like some of these mattes aren't very pigmented and some of the shimmers aren't identical. Like some of these are basically toppers, and I think that's okay for some people. I think some people like toppers. I personally do not like toppers. I'm not somebody who likes a topper. Here's one of the other like shimmers. It's not overly light reflective. It's almost like kind of a glittery matte formula, and I kind of like my shimmers to be a little bit more impactful, and so for that reason it kind of ranks a little bit lower. I don't mind the pan size. I like the color story. I like the depth that you can create. I think I created some really nice looks out of this palette. It's just that, yeah, like some of these shimmers are totally toppers and then some of them just don't have a lot of light reflection. I think that's really like the only thing about this palette that pushes it so low, is just that I can never get a really shimmery look out of it, and I always want to, because the color story makes me like want to have a really nice shimmer. And yeah, there's a ton of shimmers in here. It's just that the formula isn't necessarily the greatest to give you kind of a really shimmery eye. So that is kind of why it is where it is. Overall though, it is a pressed pigment palette, so it is mentioned that it's not safe for the eyes, even though I'm not using it anywhere else. Of course, they do have to say that when they release these palettes. Otherwise, those couple of things, I actually thought it was a really fun color story. I have not liked NYX shadows in the past. This has to be my favorite eyeshadow palette from NYX. The next one also comes from a collection that I picked up the whole collection. This was from the Flirty Talk collection from Colourpop. I originally thought I was gonna really like this because I love a lot of pinks. I like the deeper reds, and I thought that I was gonna be able to create good depth with it. But this whole like 2-pan row here, they basically look identical on the eye. So these 3 are shimmers and then these 3 are mattes. And those 3 like together, they just look very, very similar when you get them to the eye. And so it was like, oh, okay, I'm not getting different looks every time I create this. There is a Super Shock shade in here, which came disgusting. And I've mentioned this several times. This is not any kind of Super Shock formula that I have ever tested. It was a steaming pile of like oil when it arrived. It was like floating at the top. Something happened in formulation in the lab with this palette that this Super Shock did not come out right, and it's not like anything you can use. Like it's not a usable shade in any way, so that was a little bit of a bummer. I do like this one here. Like this metallic is like my favorite in this palette. It's beautiful, it's pigmented, it's super light reflecting. It's my favorite thing. But I wish this one right here wasn't a mess. Like it didn't come poorly formulated in the lab, and I wish that there was a little bit more variety kind of on this side. So yeah, overall I kept getting like the same 2 looks over and over again, and then that one shade in there was yeah, it was rancid. It was just bad. So that was a bummer. Another brand that I tried for the first time in 2023 was from Laura Geller. So I did pick up 2 of her palettes. I have only tried one of the 2. This one was the Delectables. This is of her baked formula. A lot of her stuff is baked. Her blushes, her bronzer, her eyeshadows. I thought this was actually quite good. When you're looking at it, it's so hard to tell if there's a difference between the shades just because of the pans themselves, like how they're put in there, because they sink into the cardboard, because they're a dome shape. They don't necessarily look very different, but they're all gorgeous. They are very neutral. There's a lot of warm tones in here. I personally like a lot of warm tones, so it didn't bother me. The shimmers are actually really nice. Like surprisingly, me. I can get my brush into there pretty well. Like I don't have issues picking them up. Getting a swatch though is a little bit difficult, but the shimmers are like light and everyday. The shadows were actually like quite pigmented. I was creating good depth, and I think my favorite thing was that they're actually like quite long lasting. I don't love the fact that these are like dome shape and they're sitting inside of the pan. That's probably what pushes this palette lower for me, is because it's just, I don't know, like the layout of it isn't like great. And yeah, like getting my finger into some of these shimmers was hard, and so I was having to apply it with a brush. Aside from that though, the quality is actually really, really good. It is definitely a boring color story, like don't get me wrong, but I need everyday palettes because I go into the office 4 days a week, so I don't go like this. So I need palettes like this in my collection. So they're important. There are some that are actually like really good quality neutral palettes. And I found that with this, I just don't think that the ease of use in this case is there. Like I wish that she hadn't inset them into the pan. That's literally the only thing. The next two are from the same brand, and they are where they are on Color Story alone. These are some of the releases that came out, I think probably the end of last year, from Viseart, the Petite Froise. This one is in Violetta. I pretty much pick up all of Viseart's launches. Like hands down, they are one of my favorite formulas. They're quite boring, like in a lot of their palettes, but some of them are very, very fun, and they're pretty expensive, don't get me wrong. I think this is like $29. However, the mattes are really, really long lasting, and they blend into each other like they were meant for each other. Like they're in love, they're symbiotic relationship. The mattes are so perfectly crafted that they basically blend themselves, and so I always have a really good time with Viseart, even when the color story is kind of like meh. I actually really love this color story, and this one shimmer is like basically like a duochrome. It's so beautiful. This is definitely like a grungier palette, and so because it's a grungier, cooler toned palette, I don't reach for it that often, but that's it. Like the formula of this is good. Viseart even has some of my favorite shimmer formula. I think that they're tremendous for everyday wear because they're light and thin, but they're light reflecting. They do a lot of like duochrome shades like this. They do it, and they do it really well. So they're very, very consistent. All of their palettes are consistent. Yeah, it is simply because this color story is a little bit darker, and I would grab for this on like a date night, and that's why this is where it is. It has nothing to do with the formulation or like the quality at all. And that shimmer is actually, I think, like kind of unique in my collection. So I love these little guys. But yeah, I mean, it's a 4-pan palette, so it offers me less variety. Obviously, I you know, the way that I craft my eyeshadows, I get one look out of this every time. The next one is again another Petite Froise. This was a release from last year. This is the Lila Doe or Doe palette. I like this just a little bit better. It's on the lighter side, and so I can wear this every day. It's a cooler tone, but they put this one shimmer in here it's kind of like a warmer toned shimmer. And if you've ever seen any of my videos where I talk about like orange shimmers, oh, they get me every time. So I love me an orange shimmer. This is just a light like peachy shimmer. Oof, I love it. That's why I love this one a little bit better. But man, every time I even swatch Viseart, I'm like, see, I know why I have these in my collection. I know that I hear some people say like they're just overpriced, they're not wowed by them. That's not me. I must be boring. I must like, you know, a consistent kind of quality shadow. That might be a little bit boring for some people, but I love, love, love these. It's just that the color story is the same every single time, so. The next one that I have is from Bobbi Brown. I think this was like a holiday release. This is the Luxe Eyeshadow Quad. This is a companion palette for sure. This is not a palette that I can wear where I can concoct like a whole eye look all on its own. This does have like a satin shade right here. These are baked shadows, and I use the satin shade, but it's, you know, it's shimmery. It's got a little bit of shimmer to it. But I think why I like this palette is that I think that these like metallic shades are so gorgeous. You guys see that? They're really buttery soft, but they have a lot of light reflection to them. They're like glitters, but they're like really fine glitters, and they stick together really well. Oh, it is a companion palette for sure. I have crafted an eye look all on its own before. It didn't give me a lot of depth. but I do like reaching for these shades. I think about them. I think that they're really good quality. They're so beautiful looking. They're beautiful looking on the eye. Yeah. And I like that they're big, fat, baked pans and you can easily reach your finger into them. So I paid too much for this, but I'm glad that I got it because I was like, why did I get that? And then I tried it and I was like, okay, not sorry, not sorry. The next one that I have is from Urban Decay. This is one of their naked palettes. This was in collaboration with Robin Eisenberg, which I think came up with like the artwork on this palette. They are an artist. I like the color story of this. I have a couple of complaints, I think, in terms of like the mattes in here, is that when I was creating an all blue look, you only have one like blue matte. And so I would have liked to see like one more deepening blue shade in the mattes. That would have been fantastic. As far as like the neutrals go, I thought it was really good. My complaint with Urban Decay shadows is that they're not a super long lasting formula. I honestly don't love all of their shimmers, but I think the shimmers in this palette were actually really good. They're very soft, they're very everyday, they're very good for beginners. I think that they had like really good shades in the shimmers. I think just the two things in this palette that put it where it is are really because the blue didn't give me enough depth in the mattes and that they're not the longest lasting eyeshadow ever. I think that they could probably improve that like a little bit because I think they blend really well together. And I think this was a good everyday color story, great for beginners. It had a little bit of fire in it. It had a lot of neutrals too, so you could wear it every day, and then blue for fun. So overall, I thought it was a really good like idea. I thought the color story was fun. Just a couple of things on there. The next one that I have is from BH Cosmetics. This is one of their Birthstone series. This is the diamond palette for the month of April. I picked up a ton of BH Cosmetics last year, so if you've watched my 2022 ranking video, you saw a lot of BH Cosmetics in there because when they filed for bankruptcy last year, I was so afraid that their formula was going to go obsolete. They were never going to make a palette again, and I wanted to be able to get my hands on whatever palettes I could. So I tried a lot of the Birthstone series. I did pick this one up on their website recently because it is still available, although not every single month is available. And I picked up a couple of other palettes that'll be in my ranking videos like later this year. But when I first opened this, I thought the color story was kind of unique and different, and I don't know if it screamed April to me necessarily. It has like this very pinky shade, and then this one that's like more terracotta, and I thought, that's interesting. Like it's in a silver and black palette, but I created a look. I did this as a transition. I did this one in the crease, and then I actually put this like black, it's almost like a metallic, and I put that in the outer corner, and it was gorgeous. This is a no-no shade for me. Like I don't do any kind of highlighting, so it doesn't serve any purpose. But this silver and this pale white, they're such good quality shimmers. They're super light reflecting. It is consistent with a lot of their formulas. I think this is a good quality palette overall. Like their Birthstone series are very consistent. I find that they're really good quality. I think that the mattes blend themselves. I think the shimmers are really good quality. They're very light reflecting. I have made criticisms before that like having a glitter in here, like a pressed glitter, is kind of like, you know, I don't really get a lot of use out of it, but they honestly have some of the best pressed glitters I have ever tried. So as far as pressed glitters go, if you like it, it's a good quality pressed glitter. The color story here, I don't get very many looks out of because I'm always using these like two mattes, and so it's more of like a pinky terracotta look mixed with like a silver or a black, like every single time I create a look. So I get pretty much one look out of it every time, but honestly the quality is so good. Like if you guys can see this glitter, it stays together so well, and it's so chunky. So this is actually a really, really good palette. And I do like the color story. It's just one look and that's all I get. The next one was from the Pinker Times Ahead collection. This is from Too Faced. This is the Positively Playful eyeshadow palette. I'm not overall like over the moon over Too Faced quality shadows. And I think that there's like the blue metallic in here was like a little out of place, or the blue shimmer. I don't think that the shimmer formula is my favorite quality. I don't think it's overly light reflecting. I think that some of these are honestly like toppers in my opinion. There's like several of them that are like just toppers. But then some of them are a little bit of a different formula. For example, like this gold one is much more like, it has a lot of texture, it's thick, it's super light reflecting. Like some of the shimmers are good, some of them feel like toppers. It's kind of an inconsistent palette. There's a shade here that I don't particularly use. I do think that the mattes here are good. Like, I think that they all blend in with each other really, really nicely. It's an everyday color story for me, and it's even like a beginner friendly palette. And I think that's why it ranks so high, is because I'm such a fan of pink shadows. So I think a lot of the pinks go much higher, especially because I go into the office and I feel like I need to think of a shadow that I'm gonna reach for on an everyday basis. So yeah, not the longest lasting formula, a little bit of inconsistencies in here, but it's a color story that I generally like overall. I think it's beginner friendly, and I think that the mattes blend into each other very nicely. This next palette actually surprised me. If you've seen me talk about eyeshadows on my channel at all, or saw my previous ranking, you might know that I am not a fan of Tarte eyeshadows. I have tried some that I've decluttered. I have some in my collection. I think that they're like okay, but there are some of the least favorite in my collection of what I consider kind of like high-end price point shadows. So this one really surprised me. This one was the Sweet Tarte Cravings eyeshadow palette. Maybe it's their Sugar Rush line, I'm not really sure. But I picked this up with a bunch of their new releases. I think that this was around the same time as like the Contour, which I call a bronzer, launched. So I picked this up also. Honestly, this is really good quality. And a lot of it has to do with that these are like a baked formula, that the pans and the shadows in the pans like come out, and so they're really easy to pick up on your finger or a brush, but they are buttery soft, buttery, and they're so pigmented. They hold their pigment, they're nice and buildable. It's a dark, grungy color story though, so for that reason I don't reach for it that much. But yeah, those are the mattes. They're so nice. They blend like butter, much more than I've ever felt like a Tarte shadow do before. And I think they have other ones that are like this, I just haven't tried them. So in some of their other ones, like the Amazonian clay formula, for example, just chalky nonsense in my opinion. These shimmers also, they are so buttery smooth. They're nice and like chunky and light reflecting. You guys, if I could describe, other than just like butter, what these shimmers feel like, I would, but that's the best thing that I could think of. They're so pigmented. Did you guys see that swipe? It's amazing. The shimmers in here are so, so good, but it's a really, really dark color story. This again is a shade I cannot use. I wish they would have made it just a little bit deeper because it doesn't show up. So I have to use this as a transition. And when I start as that shade for my transition, I immediately get like a really dark eye look. I love it though. I think the quality on this is really good. Here's me trying to take these off. The pigmentation, the long lastingness about these shadows from Tarte are unlike I have ever seen in any one of their other palettes. So yeah, for that reason, I think that these are really, really good shadows, honestly. The next one that I have is just a quad. It's very small, so I get the same look out of it every single time. But this one is the Venus and Floors Luxe Quad. It's the Voyeuristic Vixen. This was one of Pat McGrath's palettes that she released for holiday. This is the only matte in this palette. So I start out with that one, and it's basically what I build in the outer corner and I bring it in. So it's heavy on the shimmer, but this one shade puts this palette where it is. It's this shade here in the corner. It's not like her Astral Blitz formula, but it's this duochrome. Oh, I can't even describe it. You guys, it is so smooth, buttery soft, duochrome. It's very unique in my collection. This one is also very similar. It just doesn't have like as much texture, but it's also like this super uber creamy shimmer. Oh, so, so good. This one in the corner is just like a regular kind of shimmer, but honestly, this shade puts it over the top for me. It is so gorgeous. I do not think that this one here is like super pigmented. I think it's kind of like a buildable, more sheer matte, but honestly it's smokable. So it smokes out and it creates like the best shimmery eye look. I just fell in love with this palette like almost immediately because of that particular shade. You guys, it is such a fiery duochrome, maybe like multi-chrome. I hope it's translating. It's just, it's so, so gorgeous. So for that reason, that one shade puts it where it is. I think it was really good. Like, I know that this was, I don't know, definitely like a higher price point, but for me, I don't know, sometimes just one shade. That's all it has to do, is just do one shade really well. I think the next one is definitely like a little bit hard to rank. This was the Whimsical Nudes from Laura Lee. I have so many complaints about this palette, but at the same time, I think the quality is really good. So hear me out on this. This legitimately looks like Windows 95 lettering. I thought it was really cheap. I thought the packaging was extremely cheap. I think that when I'm thinking of nudes, I'm thinking of like maybe more neutral shades, and then you get this, which I get it. These are definitely nude shades, but they're so warm, and like it's a yellow kind of orange green palette. I don't know if this is exactly what I would think of when I think of like whimsical nudes. So yeah, and then the Windows 95, like this looks like some stock picture somewhere. It was kind of cheap. It looks like it was a little phoned in. And then two of these shimmers, they almost look the same. So yeah, I think those are my gripes. Now hear me out on the really good parts about this palette. I absolutely love the colors. I think that when you're looking for something that's like this, that's more like sour. I don't know how else to describe it. It's definitely like an acquired kind of warm toned palette. But these shimmers, her shimmer formula is so delicious and delectable and soft and like almost like a super shock and like super light reflecting, and they're just buttery smooth. Look at them. And they're all like this, every one. And I think that Lunar Beauty, I mean, Manny is her best friend, but Lunar Beauty has a very similar like shimmer formula. These are such good quality shimmers. The mattes are actually really, really good quality as well. They're kind of mid-range in terms of like longevity, but they blend together beautifully. I think that it's a really good quality palette. Just the color story is super weird when she calls it Whimsical Nudes, and this cover, the packaging is like extremely cheap. In my personal opinion, I have never personally crafted a palette. I just never would have picked like this. Seems to me like really stock kind of photo and lettering, but I think the quality is really, really good. And so I think that's why that one went there. I don't reach for those shades all the time, but you know, I'm never disappointed in the eye look I get when I do wear it. The next one that I have, I think that it surprised me that I put it where I did, because I look at this palette and I think of it as being like a filler palette in my collection, just one that I think is like okay, but not the best. But then it's one of those that just surprised me in terms of quality. This is the In My Element eyeshadow palette from Oma Beauty. This is like a really nice everyday curated palette. It has warm tones on the top, cool tones on the bottom. So you basically know which row you're gonna reach into depending upon whether or not you're looking for warm or cool tone shadows. I like the way that this is laid out. The shimmer quality is freaking excellent. Obviously swatching away my arm today, it's very similar to the Laura Lee Los Angeles in that it's like buttery smooth. It reminds me of the Super Shock formula from Colourpop. It's just very, very similar. I think Laura Lee shimmers are definitely better than these, but this color story is better in my opinion. Because if I'm reaching for something that's like a nude, I definitely think like, okay, I can have one warm tone eye look if I wanted, or a cool tone eye look. These just surprised me. I think again, they're not like a very long lasting shadow, but they're an everyday wearable shadow that blends themselves, that have good quality shimmers. So I did quite enjoy this. We are on into the section of like my colorful shadows. I do like to play with colorful shadows. I'm not every day, but like a lot of times on camera and sometimes at work, I will get a little crazy with my shadows. So this is like the colorful eyeshadow section, if you will. The first one up that I have is from Juvia's Place. This is the Candy Shop palette from the Candy Shop collection. I'm like, how do I hold this? There are a lot of shades in here that I really enjoy, even on an everyday basis. And I have said this before, but like these orange shimmers are some of my favorite. They excite me so much. I think Juvia's Place has really good quality shadows. I think that they're overall pretty pigmented and they're pretty long lasting. I usually always get, I don't know, just a really good eye look that I enjoy. I have some complaints about this one. I do find that I have a hard time building, again, the same thing with that Urban Decay one, like an all blue look, because you have one blue matte and the rest of these blues are all like metallics or shimmers. So again, I wish there was one more blue shade in here, one lighter blue shade. That would have made this palette spectacular, I think, for me, because I do think that Juvia's Place does color really well, so it would be one that I would think of to like grab blue. I do have a little bit of a gripe though. This beautiful duochrome in here is only a topper. And yeah, it's so thin. It doesn't have a lot of light reflection to it. And I'm somebody who likes like a thicker, really light reflecting, almost textured shimmer. And this one is so beautiful, but it's not. It's a topper. Again, a topper. Overall though, I can grab for this for fun. I can grab for this for every day. I do like the quality of these shadows, but there are those couple of things. I wish this wasn't a topper. I wish they had a lighter blue. Aside from that, I think that it was really good. However, when I'm comparing it to my other Juvia's Place shadows, I do not think that this is their best quality. I find that other Juvia's Place shadows are better quality than this. That's just my personal opinion. Do I like it? Yes. Do I think they have better? Also yes. All right, so when we're talking about obsolete palettes, we just had this brand just notified us that this particular collection is no longer going to be kept in stock. This one is the Futurism 5 eyeshadow palette from Kaleidos. This is the Electro Turquoise. I have a couple in my collection, but I wanted to go back and grab this one because they did announce they are no longer going to be carrying this. And this is the only one that I didn't have that I would really wear. I think Kaleidos eyeshadows are really tremendous quality. The reason this isn't like super high is just the color story. I did an eye look with this and I tried to incorporate like all of the matte shades, and I think the eye look was kind of funny. I don't necessarily think that I created the most cohesive look out of this. I think that I should have just drawn from like 2 of the mattes over there, 2 of the mattes over here, but the quality of them is so good. They're so pigmented, they're so blendable. Even beginners, I think, really don't need to struggle with the quality of Kaleidos. This teal blue in here, I mean, aside from their shimmer formula being soft, buttery, beautiful, fantastic, pigmented, all those great qualities about them, I think that this blue teal is just beautiful. So I think this is a fun color story. I think you have to be careful like what you go for, like 2 mattes at a time probably to build a look, but the quality of Kaleidos is just so good. So I think it's a color story thing for me that it landed where it is, and it's also a quality thing for me where it landed where it is. I think this could have been like really low based on the color story if the quality was poor, and I think it would have been really high if the color story had been better because the quality is so good. The next 3 that I have are all from the same collection, so they are in the order that they're in based on color story and color story alone. These were the, I totally forgot what the collection was called now, but these were the ones that Odins Eye recently had with the other YouTubers here, and it came with the 3 palettes, and I just cannot remember what the collection was called. So we'll pop it up on the screen, but I am ranking these again in terms of color story, and this was completely after using them and being able to like create looks that, you know, I could get out of them with my own like, you know, sense of creativity. So the first one was the Sea Talk palette. I originally thought that this color story was going to be my favorite, like when just looking at the color story, so I was actually only going to pick up this one. I ended up just getting the whole collection because, you know, I don't know, I'm such a fan of Odins eyeshadows, especially I think their newer palettes are formulated differently than some of their older ones, and in my 2022 ranking, Odins Eye was my top palette, their Merry Christmas palette, so I had to just pull the trigger and get all of them because I was gonna get FOMO if I didn't get them. But once I got this, I realized I just struggle with constructing a look because there's only 3 mattes, and this is a collaboration with Rowan Beauty, and I know that she's really heavy on shimmers. Like, she loves a good shimmer. She's definitely like, you know, kind of a one and done shimmer kind of girl, but I had a hard time because I don't just reach for one shimmer. I like having mattes that I build with shimmers, and so for that reason I ended up struggling with this palette more than I thought. These 2 mattes here, I could pair together. But then I got a mostly brown look, and then she only has like one dark blue matte over here. And so yeah, I mean, I guess I was struggling a little bit. It's such good quality though. There's nothing inconsistent about any of these shades. And however, I don't necessarily think they're all the same formula. Some of them are a little bit more thick and textured and chunky than some of the other ones. Odins Eye does like a tremendous job overall with their formulations. I don't have like a way to incorporate this kind of neon shade in my eye looks, but I have seen Lauren do it, where she creates some like inner corner highlights with this, and you know, some kind of like one and done looks with this. And I think that's great and beautiful, but for me on my everyday use, I was definitely struggling. Aside from pairing these 4 shades together, pairing some of the other ones together. And that's really it. I don't think I have anything in this palette to pair this pink with or this one with. So I think that's why it landed where it did. These are all very blendable shades. They all have great pigmentation, good longevity. The shimmers are really, really nice. I mean, it's good Odins Eye quality. It just ended up being a Color Story thing for me. The next one is a pretty vibrant one. This was the Planet Spirit palette. This one was in collaboration with Betty Jean, which is Batty Bean is her YouTube channel. When I originally thought I was just gonna get the Sea Talk palette, part of the reason was that I just looked at this and I was like, okay, these are super bright shades. Can I get any kind of everyday wear out of it? And I think of that when I'm buying a palette. Is there any shade in there that I'm gonna get use out of every single day? Or will it only be a palette that I wear for the purposes of like filming or playing around? And when I looked at this one, I initially thought, no, I'm probably only gonna wear this for YouTube. But then that's not exactly what ended up happening. I pulled some of these pinks and oranges in, and I was able to create a look that I ended up wearing for everyday wear. And then I was like, okay, you know, sometimes you can't tell by a Color Story necessarily. I think these are definitely like the same Odins Eye formula. I think these are all really good. I do think that this one in the corner is a bummer because it's just a topper. Ooh, it's a duochrome topper, but it's still a topper. And if it's a topper, I don't like it. But that's just me personally. That doesn't mean the quality is bad. I think that the mattes are like super duper pigmented, very, very vibrant. The quality is good, and it ended up being a palette that I could actually wear if I went in with a light hand on an everyday basis. I think though that the next one just wins in terms of like where they rank, simply because the Color Story is more wearable, but it also has shades in there that you can get to play around with. There are still shades in there that you can get a little bit wild with, even though you can still work it into wearing at the office. And that is the Flora Story palette, coming in, I guess, first in this collection in collaboration with Makeup Just for Fun. So look at the Color Story. You can still get some vibrant looks out of it, but you can also take this straight to the office. This one in the corner again is a topper shade, and it's like always a bummer for me, even though, you know, it's a nice yellowy duochrome, yellowy pink kind of green shift. I think it's actually a multi-chrome. The shimmers in here are super nice. They're all consistent with the other 2 palettes. It's just a Color Story thing for me. And I honestly didn't think that I would like this as much as I did, because I don't reach for that many cool tones. I reach for warm tones like all the time, mostly every single day. But I ended up loving this one the most simply because it was more versatile than the other 2 for me. We are officially down to the top 5 palettes, and I absolutely love all of these. I love them all for different reasons. And I think one of them, the next one here, definitely surprised me. So this was one of the releases from Too Faced. This was the Italian Spritz palette in the tin packaging. I didn't expect to love this as much as I do. I think part of it is because it's such an everyday wearable palette, and it has like a good variety of mattes and shimmers. I think the only out of place shade for me is probably this one. I even like this like deep blue one, and I think that this light blue, because it's like it's like a topper basically. It's almost like, you know, a matte. It just doesn't have like a whole lot of reflection. It's on the lighter side. I have pulled it in before. I think it's good for like the inner corner, but that's about it. So for that reason, I like that it's thinner, but I get depth out of it. I can also get like an orangey look. I can do an everyday look. I can go brighter. I just had a lot of fun with this. I was expecting this not to be as good as it was for me in terms of quality, because I've been, I don't know if I would say like let down about Too Faced palettes in the past, but some of these tin pans I've heard haven't been great quality. The 2 that I have are just okay. They're not some of my longest lasting or favorite like formula mattes or shimmers, but I thoroughly enjoyed this. These shimmers are like really chunky. There's a lot of texture to them. They're very light reflecting. They have such a good stick to them. I think that the mattes in here, like the color story and the variety of the shades just really gets me, and I always get like a fun look. So it's a reached for palette on an everyday basis, and I think I just got surprised at the quality because I was expecting less, but I think it's actually a really good release from Too Faced. The next one that I have is a pretty dark, pretty grungy palette. This was the Chucky collaboration with Glam Light. It's not an everyday reached for palette, but man, is it good quality. The mattes are so blendable, so pigmented. The shimmers are just, ooh, they're like silk. Every one of them is really good and really light reflecting. They're just beautiful. They literally go on like silk or butter. I think what I loved the best about this palette was that even though it looked super dark and grungy, it ended up coming up with a really colorful look. I think I drew in like some of these shades here that I thought were gonna be a lot darker, and they ended up pulling like a beautiful burgundy shade. They just created such a smoky look. Like you can smoke these shadows out to be much more muted and like everyday if you want to. Don't get me wrong, this is a super grungy palette and I don't reach for it all the time, but the quality is so long lasting. It's so staining, it's pigmented, it's blendable. These shades blend nicely with one another. They even give depth even though they're really dark. So I fell in love with it. The packaging is pretty cool too. I just think that the quality on these was, oh, they were so good, you guys. We are down to the top 3 palettes. These next 2 are from the same brand, and I'm gonna tell you guys to like stop what you're doing and at least look up this brand when you are done, because I think they are so good. I do not hear a lot of people talking about them on YouTube. They are an indie brand out of the UK, but I find a lot of their stuff, like they have good sales, it's quite affordable. These are amazing. I fell in love. These are currently my favorite indie brand shadows, probably my favorite that I have tried like at all this year of the new ones that I've tried. These are from Unique Beauty. Unique is spelled E-U-N-I-Q-U-E. So it's uniquebeauty.com. These are their little mini palettes. They do have larger ones. And this one I think was Africa. These are handcrafted palettes out of the UK. I don't know if I mentioned that. It is cruelty free. These are so delectable. They blend like dreams. They came out with like a series of them that were like based on women. There was China, there was Africa, there was like others in there. I don't know that they're all still available, but these are such good quality. You can tell that they're handcrafted because they don't all sit in the pan evenly. So when I got this, I was like, okay, you know, we'll see what the quality is like. But you guys, it's some of the best. They are buttery, so, oh my God, it's like water. It's like touching water. And then the shimmers that are more textured, oh, they're so good. This one's like a duochrome. It's not just about the color story for me here. It is also that not only do these mattes last a really long time, they blend together perfectly on the eye. These shimmers are literally to die for. There's differences in all of them, but my favorite thing probably when I have a 6-pan palette like this is that you get 3 mattes to 3 shimmers and you get variety. And that's what I get out of every single one of the palettes that I have from them. I think they do a tremendous job with their powder formulation. I even have a blush from them that is so pigmented. It's so good. I have to like go in with a light hand. It's staining. It lasts a long time. It's just so gorgeous, and they're literally on sale right now for $3 a piece. These aren't very expensive, but these shimmers, they're something else. These mattes are, oh, they're also something else. They're like honestly butter. They're such good quality. They're smooth. I can't like say enough good things about this brand. The reason this one is where it is because it's like a darker color story, cooler tone color story. It's not necessarily what I reach for on an everyday basis, but I love it. Like, it's a great date night palette. It's a good travel palette because they're, you know, it's very small. Don't have enough good things to say about that. The next one that I have is also from Unique Beauty. This is the Me, Myself, and I palette. The reason I like this a little bit better is just for the color story, because I am a warm tone palette girl on an everyday basis, and I can pull this in for an everyday look all the time. But look, 3 mattes, 3 shimmers, you get variety. I love the curation of this color story. She throws in like duochromes and multi-chromes in this. Look, they don't even look like duochromes and multi-chromes when they're inside the pan. But when they pull to the lid, they're so duochromy. Oh, this soft, like fiery shade here. I hope it's like translating just how beautiful it is. They're gorgeous. This one is more my speed because of color story, but the formula and the quality on both of those is the same and it's superb. So yeah, stop what you're doing. Like, just check them out. Just check them out. We have officially reached my #1 palette that I have tried so far in the year of 2023. I'm very, very excited. I ranked its like counterpart, or its drugstore counterpart, pretty high in my ranking video for my 2022 shadows. So I'm actually not surprised that I put this where I did. That particular palette ranked really high, and it was the first time that I had tried anything from this brand or its drugstore counterpart. So it is what made me go to the website and like pick up the not drugstore, the more high-end version of this. This was the Black Magic palette from Oma Beauty. You guys, there is something about the quality of this. There's a lot of really good things about this. It has a lot of pinks and purples that I absolutely love. That's my most reached for kind of eye look. I mean, I'm even wearing that now, but that's what I reach for on an everyday basis even. So this palette can like be used at the office for me, but you have 1 row of mattes and 1 row of shimmers. I like the layout. It's an even ratio. That to me is so important. These shimmers are, they're delectable. The mattes, oh my gosh, the way that these mattes blend in with each other, like they were made for one another. They play so nicely. I have created some of my favorite looks out of any eye look I have ever created with these mattes. But these shimmers, you guys, the drugstore equivalent was Oma by Sharon C. Her palettes, oh my gosh, she uses the same exact formula. So if you wanted to see like the drugstore equivalent of like the quality, check out those quads that she just released, the Oma by Sharon C, because this palette does retail like currently for $42, and I did pick this up from Ulta, but the quality of everything is delectable, delightful. Oh, it's so good, you guys. Like I said, everything blends in with each other like they were meant to be there. They don't diffuse out into nothing. They hold their pigment, but they are blendable, so you can smoke them out. Whew. It's really, really good quality palette. My favorite look that I created this year so far came from this palette. So that is why it is my #1 spot. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I thoroughly enjoyed doing this ranking video. I hope that you guys enjoyed. I would love to hear in the comments down below whether or not you guys agree with my ranking, whether or not you've tried some of these palettes, if you're interested in trying some of them, or if you have some palettes that I may not have mentioned that you think are really good that I should give a try to. Please do let me know. If you are not currently subscribed to my channel, I hope you do consider subscribing. I am out of here, and until next time, you guys, bye.